Hi, welcome to Represent NYC on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I'm State Controller Tom DiNapoli. I'm pleased to be back with you, our first show for the year of 2022. And this show will be a little different than many of the other shows I've done. We're going to have a conversation, and we're going to have a conversation with my counterpart, the newly installed Comptroller for the great city of New York. And I'm talking about the Honorable Brad Lander. Brad, thanks so much for joining us so early in your tenure as our city controller.
I'm really honored to be here. It's been fun to learn from you and to get started. You know, as we've joked a few times, when you've got two comptrollers, you know, that means everything is really under control. So I'm excited to continue the conversation that you and I have already been having.
Well, I remember when you and I spoke, it feels like it was ages ago when you were first thinking about running. And, you reminded me of your great work in the nonprofit sector. And obviously we got to know each other when you were on the city council, one of the great leaders on the city council, never afraid to tackle tough issues. And, I could tell then you had a vision for the office. And in many ways, probably when you were first thinking about running, you could not have anticipated, none of us could have, how the city and the state, for that matter, would be at such a crossroads. So there's a lot for us to cover in a short time, but why don't we lead off? I know you announced your roadmap, I think as you called it, for the beginning of your administration. Obviously, a lot of our responsibilities are similar, but not quite the same. People often ask me, the state controller isn't the same as the city controller. What's the difference? And there's the broad agenda of transparency and accountability certainly is there. Similar work on pension fund, although our structures are different. You have a different role on contracting than we do. So it's not all quite the same. But that being said, you laid out, and I know you had a great transition team, a pretty ambitious agenda. How about sharing with our viewers, some of the highlights of what that roadmap is all about?
Thank you. Yeah, so just last week we issued our transition report. We had a great transition committee of about 40 people, two wonderful co-chairs, Carol Kellerman, longtime leader of Citizens Budget Commission, really focused on how do we make government work better, hold it to account, make sure we're spending our money efficiently, tell the truth. And Mark Winston Griffith, longtime leader of the Brooklyn Movement Center, somebody who's really focused on social justice and racial equity. And one way I thought about the transition was, I think sometimes people think that effective government and bold or progressive government are in contradiction with each other. But to me, they really have to go together. If we want government to be able to do big, bold things like help us get through a pandemic, achieve a more inclusive recovery, confront inequality and racism, get ready for the climate crisis, all those things will only work if government is working, if it's delivering its services effectively, if it's telling the truth, if people believe what your books say, if you have a good credit rating. So when you go out to the bond markets, you can finance your long-term investments. So what I love about this office and, admire about the way that you've done it is there's a real opportunity to make sure you're focused on making sure government does its job, that it delivers the goods, that it tells the truth, that it secures retirement security for those retirees. And that helps to build trust in government so it can take on the ambitious things that we need it to do. So we divided the report into two sections. One that we look at as the core duties of the office. The office has a set of core responsibilities like delivering retirement security for our public sector workers, which well, you're the sole trustee for the state's public sector workers. We've got 5 separate funds for police, fire, teachers, and public employees. But the Comptroller's Bureau of Asset Management is responsible for responsible fiduciary investing to make sure that we achieve the returns that we need to provide retirement security, but with an eye toward the other systemic risks in our economy, like the climate crisis, like systemic inequality. So, one of our jobs in the first 100 days, we've got to get busy hiring a new chief investment officer. So we're launching a search to do that. And we're creating a really even more compelling program for what's called environmental, social, and governance, or ESG investing, how to achieve those top tier market returns along with attention to those big crises we're facing like climate, racism, inequality. So we've laid out a plan for how we're going to do that. Obviously, the challenge that the city and the state are facing at the moment is how we achieve an inclusive, vibrant, resilient recovery from COVID. We have all this one-time money coming from Washington, and we got to make sure we spend it right to get our schools open safely, to support small businesses, to help Broadway and our city come back to life, but also to share the benefits of that recovery much more equally. We've said so many times during the pandemic that it really shined a spotlight on pre-existing inequalities in healthcare, in housing, and who's working on the front lines. And we need to do better to make sure that we build an economy that really works for the folks like those essential workers who are on the front lines, but so often excluded from the benefits of our economy. So it's make government work better through our auditing, through improving contracting, achieve an inclusive recovery from COVID, and then finally get ready for the risks that are to come. We saw during the pandemic what it looks like when you're not ready for a crisis that hits you, you haven't prepared. But obviously we can prepare for future crises. The climate crisis is not just coming, it's already here. And of course, there'll be future fiscal crises as well. And one job of the Comptroller is to make sure we've got the budget cushion, the savings, the reserves to weather those kind of storms as well. So yeah, so we've laid out a plan to get started on all those things, and we're really excited about it.
You're firing on all guns, as they say. I mean, I think to your latter point, one of the issues we've identified, concern for the state, but frankly, even more so for the city because of some of the new programs that the outgoing administration made commitments to. The federal money, which has really been the game changer for us at the state level, certainly for the city as well. The Biden administration and our friends in Congress, we have to give a shout out to Chuck Schumer, really delivered big time, billions of dollars, really keeping us afloat at the state level, New York City localities all across the state, the MTA, what a lifeline all of that's been. But, the federal money is not going to be forever. And that's not even talking about the possibility of an economic crisis, let's say some kind of an economic downturn a couple of years from now. What we do know for sure, the federal money is going to be spent down. And it's spent down on the theory that as the economy recovers, the revenues coming in will make up for the federal money that's not there. But we have to be mindful of, particularly at the state level, one of the big concerns I've had is that New York State has done a very poor job of building up our rainy day reserve funds. And I'm very pleased in Governor Hochul's executive budget proposal, she's proposing a very ambitious goal of 15% of state operating funds to be put aside over time in reserves. And I know at times in the past, actually, the city on a percentage basis did a little better. I think you and your colleagues on the council, worked hard to achieve that under the prior administration. But I think that's where that monitoring role that I play, that you play, becomes very important because, people tend to look, for the budget that's either being adopted or that's underway. People tend not to look 2, 3, 4, 5 years, down the road. And that's really where I think our offices have a very important role to play. And I just also want to make the point for our viewers, a reminder, you're the city controller, you don't work for the mayor, right? I can't tell you how many times people say to me, what's it like working with the new governor? I said, well, working for the new governor, they say. I said, well, I don't actually work for any governor. It's the independence of the office that really is the strength of the office. And I know in your career in government, no one's ever accused you of not being independent. So I think, you bring that very important skill and trait. And the other piece, you mentioned the audits. Our auditors are professionally trained, civil service people. These are not political people, right? I mean, obviously you have certain appointments, I have certain appointments at the top level, but these are folks who are trained to look out for how money is going to be spent most efficiently, most appropriately.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the credibility of our respective offices come in. And so you're I can't keep saying you're new because you've been in there enough time at such a challenging time that you're already a veteran. But you also have a new mayoral administration as well. That's another interesting dynamic. How's that been going so far?
Actually, it's really been going well. I was actually just over at City Hall meeting with Mayor Adams today. He and I have known each other a long time. He was the Brooklyn Borough President, and I was a Brooklyn member of the City Council. So, we don't see eye to eye on every political issue. Nobody does. And of course, the New York City Charter builds in a kind of constructive tension. The job is to tell the truth and to be the chief accountability officer. But I have to say, so far, the mayor has made clear he wants to focus on dysfunction in city government. So he said, Brad, I need you to audit the hell out of my agencies. We released our first audit last week on NYPD civilianization. It identified a series of ways in which the NYPD had not done what they had promised to do and had not provided clear and adequate information. The same day it came out, he sent me a text, Brad, this is a good audit. We're going to be digging in and trying to fix some of the problems. So, and we've got a task force he and I have already set up together on procurement and contracting, because I don't know about state procurement, but city procurement right now, if you're a nonprofit human service provider and you're contracted to provide meals to homebound seniors or after school programs for the kids, it could be a year or a year and a half from the time in which you have to start providing the services before you see your first check to get paid for the work you've done. So he and I have created a task force together to fix that problem. So we're hoping to roll up our sleeves together to make city agencies and government work better. At the same time, as you say, you've got to tell the truth and be independent. And actually our first substantive disagreement, the mayor's and mine, came in the first week when I learned that the city's Office of Management and Budget was going to be seeking authority for a $19 billion increase in the city's debt capacity. We've got about $130 billion that we're able to borrow right now. This is the money for our roads and bridges and school buildings and, critical capital investments that are urgent, always urgent to make, especially in the era of the climate crisis. But, and this kind of goes to what you said about auditors being professionals. So our public finance folks came to me and said, Brad, we know you love roads and bridges and investing in schools and parks and libraries, but we think it's imprudent to seek a $19 billion increase in the city's debt capacity right now when we don't really know where we're going to be in this recovery. We got to see whether our property values stabilize. Let's see what we could get from the federal infrastructure bill. And we're not even going to need, by City Hall's measure, any of that money before 2025, 3 years from now. So that was, we put out a statement saying, we think this is premature. We don't think it makes sense to increase the city's debt capacity at this time. And we'll have to have a respectful disagreement. That's a decision that'll be made by the legislature and the governor, whether to grant that additional capacity. But, what I would say the first few weeks show is, we are able to roll up our sleeves together to solve problems and still provide that independent, prudent oversight, make sure we're going to be able to afford, next year's expenses, keep an eye on the long term. That is really the job. And I'm grateful that the mayor seems interested in having that kind of relationship, which can be constructive while also being independent.
I think he wisely put out a goal exempting certain city agencies, but 3% spending efficiency to be realized. And obviously your office could help play a role in identifying where a 3% savings could happen without really compromising services. I think, again, for the city looking at the out years, there are gaps that have to be addressed. And the sooner you can get those gaps under control, especially because of the uncertainty that, you've laid out there for the future, the better position the city will be to weather that. And even on debt, the controllers are always talking about debt and expressing concern about it. And, typically administrations are always looking for as much authorization for more debt as possible, even if they say that doesn't mean we're necessarily going to utilize the authorization. We just want to have it there just in case. But the temptation, as we've seen long history at the state level and the city level, is that when it's authorized, very often it's utilized. And this came up with the prior administration as well, before we knew what Washington was going to be doing, when there was a push to have the state legislature authorize a significant borrowing for the city. And many of us said, similar to what you just said, well, why don't we get a little more information before we authorize that? Of course, it didn't happen, and more money came in, thankfully, for the city to balance it out. But I do want to also mention, while I really appreciate your comments about the importance of the recovery and it being an equitable recovery, that we lift all boats. For New York State, New York City is such an important part of our economy and such an important part of the revenues that drive everything else we do in the state. And the reality is, and we put out many reports on this on a regular basis, the city, because it was hit first and so hard by the pandemic, the city is taking longer to recover than many other regions of the state. I mean, the state's economic recovery is strong, but it's certainly not even. If you look at just the job numbers, so at the statewide, we've probably grown back now about 64% of the jobs that were lost at the depths of the pandemic. New York City has grown back less than 60%, I think about 56, 57%. So the city really has been lagging for various reasons. And that's why the combined efforts, your efforts, the mayor's efforts, city council's efforts to really nurture this recovery and to have it be across the board is very important to all of us in New York State. We're not going to make it if New York City doesn't make it.
Absolutely. No. And we appreciate, I was glad to see in Governor Hochul's budget some things that will help get investment flowing into the city. Look, obviously first is to keep doing what's necessary to get the pandemic under control, because bringing our tourism economy back, getting people coming to Broadway and going out to restaurants and going to our cultural institutions, that's so important in the city's economy. I was pleased. I talked to a few museums. I talked to the Brooklyn Children's Museum president last week, and she said they have had over just the last 2 weeks, some of the best numbers she's seen during the pandemic. So that was very hopeful as we come to the other side of the Omicron wave, getting the city safely open again, and people really flowing back to Broadway, flowing back to cultural institutions, flowing back to kind of restaurants is a critical step. Look, work is going to look a little different on the other side of it. And, I've been talking to corporate employers, some of whom still don't have their workers back. And we are going to see a more hybrid economy. I just think remote work is going to be more of a thing on the other side of the pandemic than it was before it. So we have to figure out what that means. Our office put out a study under the prior controller that said, yes, fewer people are getting lunch in Midtown, but more people are getting lunch in Crown Heights, a local restaurant. So, we need to think about Midtown and what's going to be happening there. Can some of those buildings be converted to housing or, to supportive housing? But we also need to just pay attention to how we spread that recovery around more equally. That means really supporting small businesses, which obviously got so devastated by the pandemic. I was actually reading up on some of your programs to invest more in small businesses. It's actually one thing I wanted to ask you about, because I know you have over the last couple of years found a way to invest some of the pension fund money in small businesses in New York State. And we want, actually, obviously always consistent with our fiduciary duty for returns, to think about whether we could invest some of the, of that pension fund money in supporting small businesses in New York City. So that's one thing I wanted to ask you about is, how you got that program off the ground and how it's been going.
It was an existing program when I first became control, but we've expanded our commitment to it. So a number of years ago, it was actually set up by legislation. An entity was created called New York Business Development Corporation, NYBDC. NYBDC has a board. It works with the banking community, and it does small business loans, small to mid-sized businesses, obviously not the big businesses that get some of the other economic development money. And one thing I like about the program is it has a goal of 25% of its loans to go to women and minority-owned small businesses. I think it's around $500 million over my tenure, right? We live in the era where folks are always rebranding. So NYBDC is now called Pursuit. I actually preferred New York Business Development Corporation. I thought it was a little more clear.
Yeah, you know what that means, really. I don't know what pursuit means.
Pursuit is, all right, so it's a pursuit. Okay, pursuing your dreams, pursuing your entrepreneurship. And we have an appointment to the board there, and they continue to really do a terrific job. I mean, typically the loans could be as small as $25,000. For a larger entity, it could be a couple $100,000. And at this point, they've been supporting small business loans in all 62 counties of the state. So, to your earlier point, we make money for the pension fund, which is obviously our fiduciary responsibility. In many ways, it functions almost like a fixed income investment. So it's a lower return, but it's been a safe return. And that's where we can justify from a fiduciary perspective doing this. And, certainly, and I know you've had many thoughts about this, the more we can invest money within our own state and within communities that could use the help, the better for all of us, right? And a stronger state economy is going to be good for all of our investments, many of which are tied to the New York economy and certainly to the health of our communities. I'm very proud of the work that Pursuit Lending does and our support for it, but I feel we need to do more. Just as you have a very ambitious agenda with regard to diversity, equity, inclusion in the aftermath of the George Floyd killing and all the other issues of racial reckoning, I tasked my folks that, what else can we do? So we actually are just launching a new $40 million committed to small business lending targeted to disadvantaged neighborhoods within New York. And we're hoping to expand that platform, hopefully to double its size in the near future, because as good as the small business lending programs we've had thus far, I really think we need to do more. And, again, the challenge is, and I always try to remind people, right, we're a pension fund. So when we're handling these monies, we have to keep in mind, that we're securing retirement benefits, in our case, for 1.1 million New Yorkers. So we have to balance that out. But we found an investment partner, one that I believe has a good track record, will be able to make money for us, but still be able to deploy capital in a way that will help entrepreneurs in disadvantaged communities in New York City and beyond. And we're very excited about that. And, you and I have had the chance, even in the short time that we've had this co-role of controllers, I've heard you speak very eloquently about issues of supporting entrepreneurs, but also housing has been a big issue to you. And I know you've had some, you've really just been so articulate about having a very broad agenda for the Comptroller's office, but, share with us your thoughts as far as how you can weigh in, because look, affordable housing, the challenge of homeless, some of the homeless services audits that we've done that showed up some real problems there. It almost seems like every year there's been a problem with affordable housing in the city, but boy, during the pandemic, has it really been laid bare that we have to do so much more?
Absolutely. Well, first I want to say I'm excited to have learned a little more about your small business investing and that new fund. And I'm going to ask my folks to reach out and see whether, we can co-invest with you in some of those spaces. But look, yes, there is no more urgent issue, unfortunately, at any point in time, but it remains true right now for New York City residents than housing they can afford. We actually commissioned a survey from the CUNY Center for Urban Research a couple of months ago, and affordable housing and the cost of living are at the top of people's lists. And that was before inflation started to erode, the paychecks, especially of low-wage workers. So we have to focus on affordable housing. And as you say, I've been doing that, my whole career. I had a 15-year career in affordable housing and community development before I got into government. And so, I'm starting because the job of the Comptroller is to say, are we spending our money wisely? The city's biggest so-called affordable housing, quote unquote, program is actually a giant tax giveaway called 421A, where $1.7 billion every year is given up in tax revenue for-profit private developers, mostly rental development, but very little of it is genuinely affordable. So we're trying to shine a spotlight on that and say, we need to reform our property tax system. That's for sure. There's a lot of inequities in that system. A homeowner in my neighborhood in Park Slope actually pays a lot less in effective tax rate than a homeowner in Southeast Queens. So that is not right. But as we're fixing our tax code, we need to stop penalizing rental properties, which our tax code currently does, and then spend our affordable housing resources in smarter ways to genuinely provide affordable housing that rents at a level that homeless New Yorkers and very low-income New Yorkers could afford. But I'd also like to see us do some new affordable homeownership work. One of the great programs in New York's history is the Mitchell-Lama program, which created a cooperative homeownership opportunity, multifamily development, but cooperative homeownership for working class and middle class New Yorkers. And we just don't have any program like that right now. The new 421A program is going to serve people who make more than $110,000 a year, which is like 75% of New Yorkers don't make that much. So we're looking at what would it look like to bring back a kind of 21st century Mitchell-Lama program. You know, there's been a lot of debate in these rezonings recently when, you know, an area gets upzoned to allow for more development. I'd like to approach communities and say, look, you know, where we're going to create more density, what if that looks like an affordable homeownership opportunity for you and your neighbors in something like that Mitchell-Lama program? So that's something that we're looking at now. There's a broader category people sometimes call social housing, community land trusts, limited equity cooperatives, things like the Mitchell-Lama program that I think are really an effective use of affordable housing resources. So yeah, my office is already doing a lot of work to say, how do we make most effective use of our tax dollars, something better than 421A? How do we reform our property tax code to make it more fair, but also make it possible for new rental development to take place? And how do we create that 21st century cooperative, affordable homeownership opportunity that so many New York families need?
I'm pretty sure there have been some legislative proposals to have an updated version of Mitchell-Lama, and we've done a number of audits on current Mitchell-Lama programs, finding some challenges. We've also done investment with CPC, Community Preservation Corps, and New York, through the New York City Fund. You've done that as well. Some of that's creating new housing, some of that's rehabbing, energy efficiency, and so on. I mean, that is another vehicle that we found, you know, successful over the years.
But no, we're proud of that program. We invest with them as well. I think I've done a couple of 100,000 affordable units, and excited to keep investing there.
Let me just ask you a quick question. Are you enjoying the job of being city controller thus far?
I'm having so much fun with it. It's hard to explain to a lot of people how exciting it is to underwrite the bonds and settle the claims and audit the city agencies. But I got to tell you, like, making city government work better, helping it deliver, and then looking at the long-term risks. I don't know if we'll have time in this session to really dig in on climate, but I know you've done a lot of work confronting the climate emergency. We have as well. And I really think this office, with its long-term pension fund investments, its view of the budget, you audit city agencies, you underwrite that long-term debt, is just a critical seat from which to really focus on a just solution to the climate crisis. And I'm having a lot of fun, and I know there's a lot more work to do.
Well, it's been a great conversation. I've been chatting with our city controller, the Honorable Brad Lander, and I know you're going to be an outstanding controller for the city of New York at a very, very challenging and very important time in the city's history. So again, thanks to City Controller Brad Lander for joining me. I'm State Controller Tom DiNapoli in New York City. I'm the other controller, but I'm honored to be co-controller with Brad Lander. You've all been watching Represent NYC on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and thank you for joining us.